Hello again. Okay, so we just started the respiratory system last video. We went through the processes of respiration and we started going through structure by structure. So we're just finishing up the upper respiratory system. We're talking about the pharynx or your throat. And we've got 2 out of the 3 sections labeled. So let's do the last one. Another color here. Okay. So this last portion is the laryngopharynx. So that's because it's by this guy here, the larynx, or your voice box. Right? So your throat has 3 sections. They're named by the part that they're by. And so now this is the passageway for both air and food. And the larynx is going to be where we separate those two. So food is going to go back through the laryngopharynx into the esophagus down to the stomach. And air is going to go into the larynx, the voice box, to your trachea, the windpipe, down into your lungs. Okay, so this is the last structure that both air and food should be going down. Right. Basically, the larynx is going to close off when you swallow food. Okay, and then down we've got the esophagus. We'll look at that in the digestive system. Cool. Okay, so let's go on. So now we're going to go to lower respiratory system, and we're going to start with that larynx or larynx. Down. I'll move myself up here. This is a really cool video showing Steven Tyler from Aerosmith's vocal cords vibrating. You should check that out. Okay. So your larynx is going to be where just air. It separates out. It's only open when you're breathing. It closes when you swallow food or water. Okay, so this front is your thyroid cartilage, because your thyroid sits there. And the very front is the laryngeal prominence. That's your Adam's apple. Okay? So you can tell where your larynx is. And inside there, you've got a couple of folds. One is your vocal cords. So one fold, so that's going to vibrate and produce sound. So you can see them here. They're white. They're avascular. And they vibrate as sound as air gets pushed through. So the louder you are, the more air you're pushing through, the more they vibrate. Testosterone thickens these as well as the laryngeal prominence. So that's why on average males have deeper voices and more prominent Adam's apples. And so this shows a view where we can see the larynx from the back. So you've got cartilage in the front, and then you've got this little piece of what's called elastic cartilage. So it's cartilage that's stretchy, and that's called your epiglottis. And when you swallow, the epiglottis comes down and basically folds over and covers the glottis or the space, so that food goes back to the esophagus instead. So this is our epiglottis. In fetal pigs, you can actually get to the epiglottis by cutting back and slightly detaching the jaw. You can see the epiglottis sitting there. And then the glottis is that space. So that space there is the glottis. So if you're choking, food has gone down through the glottis. So what you're trying to do with the Heimlich maneuver is you're trying to force that food back up through the glottis and out. Okay. So now let's look a little bit more. Oh, why that moves over? Vocal cords. So The white is avascular. This one is ugly looking because it's got inflammation. Laryngitis. Usually you can't speak well. Hurts to talk. And so the vocal cords, like think about a rubber band. If it's thin and long, you're going to have a higher pitch sound. If it's thick and looser, you're going to have a lower pitch sound. So based on how tight and thin the vocal folds are is the pitch that you do, like ah, oh, and then the loudness is based on how much force you're using. So when you whisper, you're sending less force, less air through. Then when you're yelling, you're pushing more air. Okay. And this link is to a slow-mo vocal folds. It's pretty cool. You should check it out. So here is our trachea or windpipe. So that's moving more inferiorly, more low. And that is a patent airway, or it's always open. And the reason that it's always open is because you have these C-shaped rings of cartilage. So if you do like a cross-section, you'll see that those rings go all the way in the front. So this is the anterior front side, and around the sides. Now you might be thinking, why isn't it a whole circle? Well, behind the trachea, you've got your esophagus. So let's move me out of the way here. So the esophagus is going to be sending food down, right? And so having that be open here allows us to get food down more easily. So this stays open but allows food to pass behind it. So the trachea is anterior, the esophagus is right behind it, posterior, and that'll go down into below the diaphragm to the stomach. Okay. Cool. So this is lined with the same type of mucous membrane as the nasal cavity. We have cilia here. It's also damaged by smoke. So instead of going back, this is going to be pushing the cilia up so that the mucus will go through the glottis and swallow. And then that trachea branches into what's called the bronchial tree. And those branches get smaller and smaller as they go to more specific areas. So the bronchial tree, we start out with our primary or main bronchi or bronchus individual. And each primary bronchus goes to one of the lungs. And then you'll have a secondary or lobar branch, and that'll go to each lobe of the lung. Our right lung has 3 lobes, 1, 2, 3, and our left lobe has 2. Okay. And then you'll get tertiary branch, quaternary, and so on until they get down, down, down into bronchioles. So in arteries, arteries branch, 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 and get to arterioles. Bronchi, branch, 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 bronchioles. Okay. And then they'll get down to where we do gas exchange. Okay. So what happens with asthma is that you've got reduced airflow as we start spasming and contracting the bronchial tubes, the muscle in there. So they're going to restrict airflow. So what you'll take is you'll take things to help relax that muscle to dilate the bronchioles. Okay. So now those bronchioles lead to these air sacs, these bundles of grapes. The bundle of grapes is an alveolar sac, and each of those individual little parts, little balls, is an alveoli. So gas exchange starts at the end of the bronchioles, these terminal bronchioles, and then we're exchanging oxygen, carbon dioxide between the blood and the air in our lungs here. They're a single layer thick to help increase the rate of diffusion, just like the capillaries are here. So the alveoli are where our gas exchange occurs. This is our external respiration. Remember that from earlier? External respiration. And so they're covered by capillaries of the pulmonary circuit. So the right side of our heart is pumping deoxygen to the lungs for this gas exchange. And so oxygen is going to diffuse from the air into the blood, and carbon dioxide is going to diffuse from blood into the air. So let's draw this, of course. So let's get an alveoli, simple squamous epithelium, so a single layer of thin cells, right? So there's the alveoli. And then we'll have a capillary around it. And we'll start out blue to show that the blood is deoxygenated going around. And then we'll switch to red, showing that it's oxygenated. Right? So now we basically got our respiratory membrane, a thin layer of simple squamous epithelium on the alveoli, a little bit of basement membrane connective tissue, and then a thin layer of simple squamous epithelium of our blood vessel. And so now let's draw where those gases are going. So oxygen goes from the air down its gradient into the blood, right? And then we've got lots of carbon dioxide in the blood. It's going to diffuse out, and we'll breathe it out. Okay. Lovely. That's external respiration. One interesting thing that we have here, type 2 alveolar cells are going to be making what's called surfactant. So surfactant is important because it acts as a detergent. So basically, your alveoli are going to have some water and mucus in them. And water is attracted to itself, right? It's going to form hydrogen bonds. So the water on each side is going to want to pull together. So if we didn't have surfactant, every time we breathe out, we're going to have that alveoli collapse. And so when you breathe in, you're going to have to breathe with more force to open them up. So we put surfactant in there. It acts like a detergent. It breaks up those bonds. So now the alveoli stay open when you exhale. So respiratory distress syndrome occurs in premature babies who aren't making surfactant yet. So they'll oftentimes have to be on a ventilator that helps them breathe because it's so hard to open those alveoli each time. Okay, and this is just a nice table from your book. I highly recommend you look through. It's got the parts of the system and what they do. Okay, so we've gone through and looked at the functions of the respiratory system, the processes, and we've looked at the structures as we go through. So now we're going to move on to the next section, the mechanisms of breathing. So we're going to look at how air moves in and out of our thoracic cavity, that space with the lungs, the heart in there. Okay. So how it moves is air is always going to move based on pressures. And just like diffusion, air moves from where there's a higher pressure to a lower pressure. Right? Same with blood flow. Blood is always flowing from a higher pressure to lower, right? It's pushing along there. So the atmospheric pressure, the pressure around us, doesn't really change, right? If you're at sea level, it's about 760 millimeters mercury, right? Okay, so we change the pressure in our lungs to be higher or lower than the outside to move air. So if we decrease the pressure here, it's lower, air moves in. And if we make a higher pressure here, it pushes air out. Right? So as we breathe in and out, we're going higher than the pressure around us, lower, higher, lower. So it's this repeating pattern. So inhalation or inspiration, air moving in, is going to be based when there is a lower pressure in our lungs. And how you do that is you make the space bigger because volume and pressure are inversely related. That's Boyles Law. So basically, the pressure times volume before equals the pressure times volume after. And so if you increase the pressure, the volume will decrease. Does that make sense? If you decrease the volume, the pressure will increase. So think about it this way. We've got a box, and you've got all of these molecules inside. And when they hit each other and they hit the walls, that's pressure. So if we make that box half the size, half the volume, 1/2 the volume, it's going to have twice the pressure then. Because now those molecules are going to hit each other more, they're going to hit the edge more. So by changing the amount of space, we change the pressure. So in inhalation,